Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Let's Edit with Media Composer tutorial. And in this lesson, we're going to continue talking about our source settings by talking about the color encoding window, and depending on the footage that you're working with, the linked plugin window as well. Now, when we talk about color encoding, what we're actually talking about is converting the acquisition color space of our footage to the working color space of our footage. Whether you're working with Blackmagic RAW footage, Alexa footage, S-Log footage, or Red footage, chances are that there's going to need to be a conversion or a lookup table applied to the original footage that was shot to convert it from that footage's original acquisition color space to a working color space that when the client sits beside you, you'll never hear them say, "Why does that footage look so washed out?" Alright, now as always, I want to remind you that if you like this tutorial or if it's helped you out at all, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it across your social media channels so we can help get the word out there about Media Composer and the best way to get up and running with it. Alright, now before we get rolling, I want to welcome back Videoguys as our sponsor for our Let's Edit with Media Composer tutorial series. I love Videoguys. Why? Because Videoguys makes my Avid license purchasing, whether it's subscription or whether it's a perpetual license upgrade for that 1 year of support and updates, they make the whole process super simple. You can make your license purchases quickly and easily on their website. They have an excellent support team to answer any questions you might have. You can save 5% on your license purchases by using the coupon code MC101, and you can even make your purchases in your local currency. Now, what I have done for the three most common purchases for licensing, which is the subscription license, standard, the subscription license for the ultimate version of Media Composer, or for purchasing that perpetual license year of support so that you get support and updates, I've included links to those in the show notes below. So simply click on one of those links to head on over to the Videoguys website. Simply enter that coupon code of MC101, save your 5%, and get that Media Composer license so you can start editing right away. Alright, now before we get rolling, we have sort of been working in what I like to call the ideal world, and that is we're working with footage like ProRes that we can easily link to, consolidate, or transcode and start working right away. However, inside of Media Composer, that is not always the case. For example, Red footage is not something natively read by Media Composer or understood by Media Composer. Blackmagic RAW footage, again, footage that is not natively understood by Media Composer. So we do need to get in before we start working with whatever type of footage that we're working with and do a little bit of background work, I'm going to call it. Background meaning outside of Media Composer to figure out what this footage is. Do we need a specific plugin, as they're called, to work with them? And we need to get those installed so that we can link to and consolidate or transcode. Now, I say consolidate or transcode if we're working with special plugins like Red, like Blackmagic RAW. They will all be transcoded. They will not be consolidated. They are not Avid-friendly codecs because they are in the RAW format, meaning that we can get in and adjust certain parameters of the clips, much like they would be adjustable inside of the camera. Now, the question, of course, does come up, how do we actually find these plugins? Well, I'm just going to head on over to Chrome here. You'll see that I am on the avid.com/plugins/AMA-plugins page. And you'll see that we do have access to locate or download specific plugins. For example, Drastic Media Reactor Lite plugin gives you access to Sony XAVC-S, Panasonic MP4, etc., which you can download the plugin from right there. More importantly for us in this lesson, the Red plugins that you can find right here. Keep in mind, it's a simple download and install. I don't think that they need a restart because they are a simple plugin to work with inside of Media Composer. And once you download and install them, that footage will be usable pretty much right away. Now, you'll notice that for some reason they have not included Blackmagic RAW in here. Now, what's important to keep in mind about Blackmagic RAW is that if you want to download that plugin to work with it inside of Media Composer, what you're going to need to do is to head on over to the support section of the Blackmagic Design website. You're going to scroll down to the latest downloads. You're going to go through the latest downloads here, just like I'm doing right now. And what we are looking for is we are looking for our Blackmagic Raw download, the developer SDK right here. As of this recording, you can see the most recent version 3.4. To be honest, you're just going to find whichever the most current version is you're going to download and install. What that will give you the capability to do is to not only link to inside of Media Composer, but inside of our Blackmagic Raw footage. You'll see that I can now double click. I'll get a Blackmagic Raw player that I can now take a look at all the footage before we start working with it. Now, what I'm going to do is just close that. That's really all we're going to talk about as far as the plugins go. Again, you need to do a little bit of research before you start working. Chances are, if you are your one-person production crew, you'll pretty much know. I mean, the most common footage type that I see a lot of people working with is Sony S-Log footage. But as you can see with Sony S-Log footage, if I come back into the footage folder, you'll see I have it right here. It is a simple QuickTime file, so we can actually just double-click on it. The S-Log footage plays. And when I say S-Log footage, what I'm actually referring to is the lookup table that will be applied to convert it from the working color space, or pardon me, the acquisition color space to the working color space. And we'll talk about that when we jump into Media Composer, which will be right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to call up our first project. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to Option or Alt and drag this footage in. Let me actually just come back to the root level here on the desktop. Option or Alt and drag that footage folder in just so that I can bring all the clips in. And what I've purposely done, just for the sake of keeping everything as simple and straightforward as possible, is I have named the footage. I'm going to say what it is, and what it is a relative term. Basically what it was acquired with for these shots here. Alexa, these two shots were acquired with an Alexa camera. You'll see this shot's actually upside down, which is fine. We've got some Blackmagic Raw footage that you'll notice is exceptionally washed out. Some red footage that looks good. There's our favorite kangaroos. And we have some S-Log footage here that again looks very washed out. Now, again, you'll hear me talking about how we've kind of been looking at things with rose-colored glasses up until this point, only because, let me just close this window here, Media Composer in some cases tries to help us as much as it can, and in other cases it just doesn't know what to do with the footage, so it doesn't do anything. So what I want to do is I want to start out by looking at footage that Media Composer just doesn't know what to do with, and that, to be honest, we'll start out with our S-Log footage. Now you'll see this footage was just QuickTime footage, simply linked to. However, we got a bit of a problem here. It looks exceptionally washed out. Now, this is where it's a little bit important to understand the difference between the acquisition color space and the working color space. Your working color space in Media Composer will always be Rec 709. So that is what we want to convert our footage to before we start editing with it. Because the last thing you want to be is in an edit room, client's sitting right there, and they're like, why does this footage look all washed out? Don't worry, it'll look fine when you get to the online. You'd rather that they have a general idea of what things are going to look like when you're editing with the footage. All right. Now, as we remember from our previous lesson, to get in and make adjustments to our color space, we're going to do that inside of our source settings. So let's get over to our source settings. I'm going to navigate up to one of the shots, doesn't matter which one. I'm going to right click, navigate to our source settings. Now you'll remember before we talked before about frame flex in the previous lesson. We're not going to talk about frame flex at all in this lesson. We're simply going to focus on color encoding. Now you'll see that we have the very first option here, the source's color space. Now, to be honest, I could change this to whatever I want. You're going to notice that it doesn't actually make a difference. What it's just going to do is it's going to tag that footage's color space. Now, I think this is S-Log 2. To be honest, when I downloaded it, I wasn't being overly, I don't know if I'd say careful, but we're just going to call it S-Log 2 here, Sony S Gamut, right there. And again, you'll see it makes no difference to the footage. Nothing has changed. So what we now need to do is to tell Media Composer via a lookup table what we want to convert the acquisition color space from to the working color space. All right. Now, because I know that this is S-Log 2 footage, I actually have a lookup table for it. Now, when I come back here and I come to the desktop and I come to my footage folder, I actually downloaded an slog2 to rec 709 lookup table. Now, depending on your workflow, and this is something that I run into all the time when I have camera ops going out and shooting stuff for me, is the very first thing I say to them, and I always set up a dialogue with them before they go out and shoot, is when you are done, please send me the lookup table that you had in the camera that the producer, director, or whoever was with you was looking at when you were shooting. This way, what it looks like in the edit room is what it looked like on the set. All right, now, again, I just found this lookup table as a general slog2 to rec 709 conversion. And the question is, how did I actually get this lookup table into Media Composer? Well, we'll talk about that in just a second, because what I want to talk about first is generic color adapters. Now, Media Composer refers to them as color adapters, which unfortunately is the way it is. It really shouldn't do that. It should refer to them as lookup tables or color space. But it calls them color adapters, and there's really two types. One is what is installed with Media Composer, which is the generic ones, and you'll see here we got a whole bunch of them here that we'll talk about in a second. And then we have ones that I've installed, which is the user installed LUTs. So let's just talk generically first, and then we'll talk about how you install your own. All right. So with the generic color adapters, you'll see that once we have generic selected, I can really just come in and search for whatever the conversion is that I need to do. Now, I installed a lookup table for this. Now, to be honest, I don't really trust any of these, but let's just hypothetically say that it was Sony slog3 to rec 709. Do we even have a proper one in here? We don't, so I'm not even going to worry about that for right now. But let's just say hypothetically I wanted to just do a conversion. I'm just going to pick one here. Let's do slog3 to hybrid. Let's do to BT21. Okay. I'm going to select that color adapter, and I'm simply going to say add. And you'll notice that as soon as I do that, the image has now changed. Basically, we've applied the lookup table to this footage. Now, again, like I said, not the lookup table that was used in the camera on the day of, but just an example of how you would simply install a generic color adapter. And keep in mind that you can actually stack them. So let's say hypothetically you had the conversion LUT that you wanted to go from the acquisition color space to your working color space like this. Then maybe you had a creative one that you wanted to add after that. You can actually add multiple ones. So if I came down here, I'm just going to add this one here. Then I'm just going to add another one. Doesn't really matter which one. We'll just pick this one and I'll just add it. So you can see you can go through and keep adding color transformations on top of each other. Now I'm going to delete all these because I downloaded one to go from slog2 to rec 709. So of course that does beg the question, how do we actually get in and install our own LUTs, which for the most part will be a common workflow for you? Well, here's how you're going to do it. What we're going to do is navigate down to our color management settings. Now, we're going to leave all of the parameters at the top, okay, for right now. And what we're going to deal with right down here is the installed LUTs. All right. You'll notice you have automatic conversions here from HDR to SDR, which we're not going to be talking about now. We're only talking about installing LUTs. Now, before we even worry about this window, let's come down here and talk about the install LUT options: project, shared, or both. What does that mean? Well, if you install for just this project, that LUT will only be visible inside this project. If you install it as shared, it will be shared across all projects, or you can do both. All right. Now you'll notice that we can select and delete. What I'm actually going to do is just delete this LUT file for right now because we're just going to reinstall it anyways. So you'll notice that I have a Blackmagic one, and this is one that I actually use all the time with Blackmagic footage only because I love it. And what we're going to do now is simply say select LUT file. And what I'm going to do is simply navigate to the desktop, to my footage, to my slog2. There it is right there. You'll see a .cube is a very common lookup table and one that Media Composer understands, along with .txt, XML, and CLF. I'm simply going to say open, and you'll see that the LUT was now successfully installed. So all I'm going to do, simply say OK. I'm going to navigate down here. I'm simply now going to say OK. And you would think that I would still, with my generic LUTs, come here, find the one I want. However, what we're now going to do is we're going to use a user installed LUT. Now, to be honest, this for me is why I like to go through and install my own LUTs. For the workflows that I'm doing, even if it is red, even if it's Blackmagic, even if it's, slog2, because this is a lot easier for me to deal with, and I know that what I'm actually putting on the footage is exactly what I want to put on the footage. So I'm simply going to choose slog2 to rec 709, and I'm going to say add. And once I do, I now know that this LUT is what they would have been looking at in the field on the display, so whatever they had in the field is going to look exactly the way that it does in the edit suite. All right. Now, to be honest, this is a fairly simple and straightforward process. It's a simple matter of know the footage that you have. And I say know the footage, and this is where things get a little bit tricky because you'll say, oh, I know it's QuickTime. No, it's not QuickTime. The footage was acquired in slog2. What that represents is what the acquisition color space is. And we know that we're always going to be going to Rec 709. All right. Now, I'll give you an example of how I know this right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave that on there. I'm going to say apply. I'm going to say OK. Now you'll see that if I come back here and I double click, this is now in the correct color space. This shot here, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. Let's go to source settings. Let's come down here. I'll just leave the source's color space the way it is. We're going to go to user installed. I'm going to switch over to slog2. I'm going to say add. I'm going to say apply. I'm going to say OK. You'll now see that it looks the way that it should in my preview window. Now, here's where we run into a little bit of a problem. And the problem is that depending on the metadata that comes across with your clip and the plugins that you have installed, Media Composer might automatically do the work for you. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at this Alexa footage here, okay? So this is actually upside down, which I will fix when we get in there. And what I'm going to do is simply right-click. I'm going to come to source settings, and you'll notice that already it's actually applied a lookup. It's actually applied 2 color adapters for me. I'm actually just going to delete the first one here, but you'll see RE709 embedded. So the lookup table is actually embedded in that footage. Now, you'll notice the clip is upside down, which is fine. In FrameFlex, what we can do is we can actually rotate the footage like such to make it correct. Now, if I come back to my color encoding window, if for some reason Media Composer didn't understand the color transformation that was required, you'll notice that when I remove it, what we're looking at is we're looking at the log C color space that it was acquired at, and what we want to do is to convert it to Rec 709. Again, no problem. Inside of generic, if you scroll down here, you'll see that we actually have an ARRI Alexa log C to Rec 709 lookup table that I will add. I will say apply. I will say OK, and you'll notice not only was the color transformation added, but that FrameFlex fix of rotating the screen around now is looking good on our footage. Now, what I've been trying to do up to this point is to take it step by step, because we're now going to add another step into this equation. All right, let's look at our red footage, and I'm just going to take our kangaroos because I like kangaroos. There's our kangaroos. And what I'm going to do, you'll notice this footage looks correct as opposed to the Alexa footage that was in the wrong color space. I say the wrong color space. It was in the acquisition color space as well as the slog footage. But the red footage actually looks fine. What I'm going to do again, right-click, source settings. You'll see that with the codec that we installed for red, the red footage, it automatically knew, first of all, when I brought it in, what the source's color space was. It also knew what lookup table, or in this case, color transformation, it needed to apply to the footage to get it to be correct in the Rec 709 color space. Now, I say to be correct. What I mean is to look correct to our eye in our working color space. But keep in mind, this is again log footage, log 3G10. If I delete that lookup table, you'll see the footage goes back to looking washed out. This is the way the log color space works. So again, if we needed to, and for some reason we brought this footage in and it doesn't look the way that we want it to, keep in mind, you could install a user-installed LUT. Maybe you had one specifically that had a little more contrast, a little bit less contrast. But for the most part, what you're going to do is with the generic lookup tables, the installed lookup tables, you're simply going to navigate your way right down here to red wide gamut log 3G10 to Rec 709. You're simply going to add it. You're simply going to say apply and OK. And now the footage is going to look correct. Now, again, this is the same actually with all the footage. However, there's a bit of an issue going on here with this shot, and I find it to be a little bit overexposed. Now, as we know, red is a RAW format, much like Blackmagic RAW. So you'll now notice that when I go to my source settings, not only do we have the color encoding window, but a new tab has appeared to the left, which is the linked plugin window. What this now gives us access to is a whole bunch of the raw parameters of the clip, much like you would have had access to inside of the camera. So you'll notice it's now showing me the acquisition's color space. I'm now seeing it with the lookup table. Again, a little bit too bright. So maybe I want to bring the exposure down, let's say 2 stops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here, just punch in -2. Okay. And what we're now going to do, you'll see that when I click away, everything darkens up a little bit. I'm now going to come back to the color encoding window, and you can now see that this footage is looking, I'm going to say a little bit, I don't know if it's a little bit better. Here still looks a little bit dark. What I'm going to do is actually come back here. I'm just going to put this at -1. All right. And now when I come back to color encoding, I think this looks a little bit better. This is sort of a happy medium. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that this is really, in most cases, what we're talking about for, we're going to call this a one light. Basically, you're coming in, you're throwing the lookup table on there. You're going to transcode so that you can do an offline, or maybe you need to output something quickly to work with, and you just want the color space to look, I'll say, pretty good. We're not talking about getting in and doing final color correction or anything like that. All right. And again, you have access to a lot of parameters. Even if the color temperature of your footage was wrong, if the ISO wasn't set the way you want it, you can actually go in and add that in here as well, or adjust it in here as well. Now, keep in mind, with any RAW format, Red RAW, Blackmagic RAW, I'm just going to say apply here and say OK, you'll have that same flexibility with the Blackmagic RAW footage. I'm just going to come to my source settings. However, inside a Media Composer doesn't understand the Blackmagic RAW format. So this is where, for me, I have a user installed LUT. This is actually Buttery LUT's Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K 6K Gen 5 to Rec 709. I'm just going to add that. It gives it a very vibrant, very colorful look. And in the linked plugins, you'll see that we can come in and make adjustments. The most common adjustment that you'll make in here is switching the color science from 4 to 5. Even adjusting the ISO, you might want to do that in here as well. But you can see that even things like the tint was already set to 10, the Kelvin was set to 5600. It remembers a lot of the raw parameters from the camera, and you'll see that with the settings, you can choose the camera's metadata, or you can choose your custom settings. For me, I normally like to just jump in, choose custom settings, set things the way that I like them, say apply. Actually, what I should do first is here, make sure we're good. Yep, say apply, say OK. And this clip is now ready to transcode to work with in our timeline. All right, so what have the last 2 lessons taught us? The last 2 lessons have really taught us about our source settings and how they're imperative to be getting in and checking anytime you link to footage that you may be working with that you're not familiar with. What's important to keep in mind is if you're always shooting HD, you're always shooting 23976, you're always shooting in Rec 709 color space, all of this information that I gave you is bonus knowledge, something that you're going to need to keep in the back of your head. If you had a client come to you and say, oh, we just shot all this stuff in Blackmagic RAW, here you go, and you're like, oh my God, what do I do with this now because it doesn't look correct when I bring it to Media Composer, or when I try to link to it, Media Composer won't even look at it. Well, this is where you need to think, Blackmagic RAW, I'm going to need a plugin to work with that. Let's install the plugin. Oh, I also know that when I bring in Blackmagic RAW footage, it's in the original color space, and it could be a different frame size or a different frame raster than what we're currently working with. So I know that I'm going to need to right-click, come to my source settings. Doesn't matter which order you work in as far as your linked plugins and your frame flex. What I normally will tell people, when it comes to the linked plugins, getting in and adjusting these original camera parameters, always come in and add that lookup table first. So this way, once we have it actually applied, and we say add, once we start making adjustments to things like exposure or tint, when we go back to the color encoding window, it will be reflected and we'll be seeing it with the lookup table applied to it, so we know what it will look like in our timeline. Now, in the next lesson, I'm going to talk a little bit about playback rates and audio. They're in a lot of cases an afterthought depending on your workflow, and then we're going to talk about what to do to transcode this footage to work with in either an HD offline scenario, or maybe you want to work with a different format scenario, and what are the implications of transcoding with all of this footage that we now know is correct inside of our project. All right, that wraps up this lesson. As always, I want to remind you that if you like this lesson, please like, subscribe, and share it across social media. And thanks to our new sponsor, Videoguys, I want to remind you that in the show notes below, if you're looking to purchase Media Composer subscriptions or maybe update that perpetual license, I've put links to both at Videoguys' website, and don't forget to use the coupon code of MC101 to get that 5% discount and save a little bit of money when you're updating your Media Composer license. And if you have any questions, you can always feel free to send them to me at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. Thanks a lot for watching.